This is the magic wand question, king of the world question that I ask our guests. If you could change one thing in your own life or in general, what might that be? Again, no wrong answer.
Yeah, there's the obvious stuff. Everybody can look back in their lives and go, well, I wish this, I wish that. But in general, I really don't live my life that way. We're where we are because of the decisions we made and the things we did, and most of us are in pretty good places. So let's just let that be. Just let it go. Keep moving ahead.
Interesting. Could you describe in detail a particular scenario or incidents where you utilize your own philosophy on leadership? Again, it can be more than one, personal or professional.
So, so much of what I do on the leadership side, I think, really manifests in terms of the way I run the company. So the example I gave earlier, to me, again, that's why I get up in the morning. But I'll give you another one, though, where it's a little more heart to heart. So I was working with this client down in Nashville, right? This is a large hotel down around the Broadway area, right? So one of the, you'd all recognize the name.
Sure.
And so I was working with this, they'd done their engagement study, and the security team had some pretty low scores. And so I'm working on the action planning side, and I'm talking with the head of security, and I'm like, okay, so tell me what's going on. And, as the guy's being, getting a lot of pushback, he's not real open, and da-da-da. And I finally just pulled back and I said, what did you do before you had this job? And he's like, well, sir, I was in the United States Army. I go, tell me about that. And so he tells me this story. I go, were you proud of that job? And he's like, yes, sir, I was. And I could see, he's just opening up. And I go, so what made you so proud? I go, he's telling me, well, I did this and I did that. I go, what rank were you? He tells me his rank. And this is great, it's wonderful. He's like, da-da-da. So he's like, okay. And I said, so how does that apply here? And he's like, well, I don't know that it does. So I sort of kicked in and I said, have you ever read the book Small Unit Leadership? And he goes, no. I go, well, I bet you have. I go, it's a military book. I said, it's for, it's an Army issued book on how do you run, these small units, and how do you set the standards, and how do you drive performance in your team. I go, I'm sure you've read that. I go, because he goes, well, it sounds like it would be familiar. I go, it sounds to me like you lived it. Yeah. It sounds to me like that's what you did in your Army days. He's like, that does sound like it. I go, it sounds to me like that's what you're missing here. And he goes, yeah, it does. And I go, listen, I want you to do me a favor. I go, you got some specific things you need to work on. I go, in addition to work on, which is all in the data, and we've gone through all that. I go, in addition to that, I'd ask you to do me a favor and read that book. And he's like, okay, well, we'll see. So anyway, so we get back together 6 weeks later, right? Yeah. And so he sits down, he's like, all right, are you ready? And I'm like, I guess I am. And he's like, all right, well, I read that book you told me about. And I'm like, what'd you think? He's like, yeah, that was good. And I'm like, well, tell me about it. And he goes, it just reminded me of everything I did in the military. It reminded me da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And I go, so what's going on in the security department? He's like, yeah, that's the best part. He goes, I had to bring those lessons back in. He goes, that was the whole thing, Shawn. He goes, I had just forgotten those lessons. And I'm like, so he had it inside of him all the time, right? Yeah. I gave him the data, gave him a couple little levers to sort of unleash what was already there, right? And so he's coming in, I'm like, well, where are you? And he's like, all right, well, we've got an offsite coming up and we're doing this. And I'm like, well, how's that? He goes, well, they picked it. He goes, they picked the offsite, they picked the location. He goes, we've got some activities. He goes, but mostly this is about bonding. And then the next step is we're going to do this. And then my next step, he goes, and I've got this 6-month strategy and I got that. He was on fire. I didn't have to do anything. And here's the thing with this guy. I gave him a few tips. I pointed him in the direction, and I let a couple of things loose. That, to me, is really exciting. That, to me, is this perfect combination of a little bit of leadership, a little bit of guidance, a whole lot of data, and let this person do what, in this case, he already knew how to do. And he just ran with it, and the guy's a superstar.